Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for gathering here tonight. I want you to imagine, really imagine, the cold biting through your bones, a silvery moonlight glinting on frozen trees, the hush of a winter night broken only by your own breath. It is in that stillness where silence roars and shadows stretch into unimaginable forms. Tonight, I will take you through 4 of the creepiest winter horror stories, true events that crack our rational shells and leave something raw, trembling in the dark, exposed to the icy wind. These stories are not tales meant to entertain. They are ghosts stitched into history, reminders that real terror walks among us, especially when everything seems frozen and safe. The first story comes from Siberia, deep in the Russian Arctic. In late December of 1933, a group of 8 men, experienced hunters accustomed to cold, snow, and peril, set out on a routine trapping expedition in the remote Vorkuta region. Blizzards were nothing new to them. Frostbite and shifting drifts were part of the job. But that winter, something utterly wrong, something unthinkable, stalked them. On the 5th night, as darkness fell at 4 in the afternoon and a moonless sky swallowed the land, one of the men, Mikhail Petrov, vanished. They searched frantically, trudging through ankle-deep snow, voices swallowed by wind that sounded like distant screaming. They found his footprints, then nothing. No struggle, no dropped gear, no hint of where he'd gone. Over the next days, one by one, the others disappeared at twilight. No tracks, no clues, just emptiness. What remained in each abandoned tent was chilling, cups of tea still steaming, boots laced but bodies gone, snares sprung but no prey. The radio crackled once with shouts, then static. Rescue teams arrived weeks later, but there were no bodies. No evidence that anything had happened at all, except broken twigs, disturbed snow, and the paw prints of an enormous beast, something that did not belong. Something that should not exist. Some said a mutated bear. Others whispered of the Wendigo, the creature of hunger and ice, driven mad by starvation into ravenous hunger, a spirit incarnate. Whatever it was, it left cold in its wake deeper than Siberian frost and a fear more lasting than the shortest winter day. The second true horror cuts across the ocean to Newfoundland, Canada, in 1845. The Franklin Expedition. You know the story. Sir John Franklin, his 2 ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, crewed by roughly 129 men, sent to discover the Northwest Passage. But winter did not merely visit them. It trapped them. Ice squeezed the ships. Provisions dwindled. The cold gnawed at their flesh, at their hopes. And then the rumors started, things done in desperation. In letters later dug up in journals and scraps, men spoke of disease, of lead poisoning, of mental collapse. But amid that collapse, in the final phases, survivors spoke of unspeakable acts, of men turning on one another, of cannibalism by the flickering glow of cracked lanterns, of bodies gnawed through by starvation more than by teeth. One surgeon's journal, hidden in a coffin, unearthed decades later, described bones of his comrades ground and boiled, of faces turned hollow, of voices hearing things outside the ice, scratching at the hull. And one haunting detail, the journals mentioned spirits. Men spoke of hearing singing across the ice, like a choir of voices drifting over the snow, children's laughter, women's cries, laughter laced with tears. They thought at first it was the wind, but later, after days without sleep, without warm fires, it sounded like mockery. It sounded like voices that knew they were dying. The ice had trapped their bodies and their souls. And though no one survived, their story lingers, the horror of isolation, the horror of winter, the horror of humanity turned against itself, a last gasp in a frozen tomb. The third true event haunts our more recent past, in the winter of 1972 in the Swiss Alps. A group of 12 mountaineers attempted to cross a dangerous pass during an early season storm. They were confident, skilled, seasoned. Yet the mountain was older than their experience. On a night when snow fell like ash, so dense the stars were hidden, they pitched tents near the summit to find refuge. Inside those yellow tents they huddled. By the third night, the storm's howl was a living thing, pressing in, suffocating, the wind tearing at the fabric. Two of them, Hans and Elise, woke to a scratching sound, metal claws scraping at canvas. They thought it was debris, rockfall. The scratch turned to pounding. They listened as the sound moved around the tents, between them, over them. The other tents where their friends slept stirred as though something were pushing, weighing, pressing. Then came silence. At dawn, they found elaborate prints circling their camp, tracks spaced far apart, too wide to be bare, claws too long, slashes in rock nearby, and torn fabric. One tent ripped open, empty inside. One sleeping bag caught in bushes. One body found at the ridge, eyes frozen wide, mouth open, lips blood blue, as though whatever had come for them had stared him straight in the face. The other mountaineers gone without trace, 2 tents empty, 5 pairs of boots standing but no footprints leading away. The search teams came. The weather had erased all tracks. What could this be? A legendary snow predator? A lurking Wendigo again? A beast unknown? It makes no difference. The cold digests all meaning, and the high wind carries away voices. The fourth story is closer in time. In upstate New York, winter of 1897. Town of Albany, small families, wood fires roaring, children tucked into beds early. But on February 12th, the mercury dropped to 50 below nil. The wind shoved snow through cracks in windows, and every house moaned under the weight of ice. That same night, a young woman named Clara Hertford, alone at home, her parents visiting relatives, heard a scream outside. She peered out, a figure limping across the porch, hunched, dragging what seemed like a bundle. Torches far down the road, but nothing between her door and the sound but swirling snow. She called out, no reply. The shape crawled, dragging something behind, something that left wet streaks in the snow, dark as blood. She locked the door, shook all through. Then came pounding. Hatchet chopping wood, crackling fire, the scent of pine and fear. She called for help, no response. Her candle flickered. The windows rattled. The front door burst open. Clara, frozen in place, saw a man, face white as frost, spattered with red. Naked but for tattered rags, teeth stained, eyes hollowed. Behind him, dragging by one arm, was his daughter, or what looked like his daughter, skin torn, lips split, eyes gone. He held a name, Clara. He said she had taken her, promised her warmth, promised safety. He had tracked Clara's scent through the snow, believing the child belonged to him now. He reached out, raw fingers inches from her throat. Clara screamed, firemen arrived, flashed light, and the man fled into white oblivion, still calling, still dragging that corpse limb. They discovered he was a farmhand, known to everyone, presumed dead weeks ago in a barn collapse. Only one policeman believed Clara's story. Others claimed sleep-deprived delirium. But they followed the blood streaks, found the barn, inside, the remains of his daughter, long frozen, preserved like ice statues, torn by the collapse, but still terrifying. These 4 stories, Vorkuta hunters, Franklin's frozen ships, Alpine mountaineers, Clara Hertford, share something beyond cold. They share the thin edge between life and nothingness, the unspeakable that creeps in when warmth fails, when hunger gnaws, when isolation becomes so absolute that any movement, any sound, seems either salvation or doom. The paradox of winter is this: the landscape seems hushed, still, benign. Snow muffles the world. Trees bend under weight. But beneath snow lie things that kill slowly: frostbite, suffocation, starvation, and things that stare from shadows: hungry beasts, madness, ghosts born of grief, spirits born of guilt. We all know winter's beauty: the crystalline shimmer of frost, breath turned to mist, the soft hush after fresh snow. But in winter's embrace, life is brittle. Humans are creatures of warmth, creatures who make fire and light and bring each other close. Remove that, and what are we but fragile vessels of fear? I think of the hunters in Siberia, each night swallowing hope, stepping into darkness, trusting in footsteps that led nowhere, vanishing. I think of the Franklin expedition, men trained, officers with titles, scientists who believed in progress, reduced to whispering and hunger, hearing voices more terrible than silence. I think of Hans and Elise in the Alps, peering into the ruins of their tents, mouths full of cold and salt of fear. I think of Clara, waiting for rescue or waking nightmare, staring at the man who had died and come back wrong. These stories tear at our faith. Faith in nature, faith in safety, faith in the promise that winter ends. They also teach us something about what we are capable of. Not just what nature can do, but what we can do or choose not to see. In Franklin's case, conspiracies and cover UPS, lies to families. In Clara's case, the neighbors thought her insane because their winter was warm indoors, safe, while hers was infiltrated by frost and madness. We often brush off cold like it's nothing. But cold is a thief of reason. It steals blood, steals warmth, steals hope. When these horror stories are based on true events, they do not fit neatly into folktale or legend, where terror wears costumes you can recognize. These are stark, real, and uncomfortably possible. We can study maps of Arctic ice, feel the blades of wind on mountain passes, count the candles in drafty houses. We can, if the winter is bad, imagine ourselves in Clara's place, or stranded on a ship with our names in penny dreadful lists of the vanished. Some people want to walk away from these stories. They call them fanciful, exaggerations, heaped horrors told by newspapers or overzealous diarists. But when researchers uncovered lead in the water pipes of Franklin's ships, when archaeological teams found graves, human remains with marks of cutting, when rescue teams in the Alps discovered fabric shredded by clawed animals, when Clara's footprints in the snow matched the bloodstains, the stories shift from legend to warning. Cold can kill quietly, but horror can burst through ice and snow like a sinner's scream. Look into a long winter night, and you sense it. You hold yourself tighter. You pull your coat around your throat. You listen for wind in the eaves, for branches scratching windows. Because there, in the dark, there is possibility of terror. There is suffering that is loud and suffering that is silent, hidden under white blankets, necessities stripped away. You understand, even if only for a moment, how fragile warmth is. We fuss with heaters, seal cracks, burn logs. But if those fail, your heart hammering, your breath shallow, you understand what it means to confront horror. These stories reach beyond geographic or temporal boundaries. They reach into every winter each of us has survived, every cold breath we have inhaled, every night we have lain sleepless, wishing for dawn. Because winter is the season of endings, but also of memory. The snow remembers footsteps. The ice holds echoes. The howl of the wind may carry voices from long ago. When we silence those stories, when we deny that horror can knock on our doors when trust is broken, when nature is no longer companion but predator, we lose something essential. We lose our awareness that life is a gift kept only through tenderness, through fire, through caring for one another, and through respect for forces beyond our control. I do not tell these stories for sensationalism. I tell them to awaken us, to remind us that winter, for all its beauty, carries lessons in fear. That real horror is not always cinematic. Sometimes it is whispering in snow, oozing in frostbite, in hunger, or in isolation. Each crack in the ice, each lost footprint, each frantic call into a blizzard, that is the heart of horror, not knowing, not hearing, not seeing, and yet knowing all the same. When you sit by your fireplace this winter, when you watch snowflakes drift, think of the hunters under icy moons, of ice-bound ships crushed by winter's mechanical patience, of tents shredded by claws you cannot name, of a woman at her door, trembling and alone, and know that horror is not always distant. Sometimes it's the cold knocking. Sometimes it is inside the frozen dark. And sometimes it is us, frightened echoes striving to be heard though we are buried under ice, desperate, longing for the light to return, longing for someone to answer when we cry out into the whiteness, the long, endless whiteness where nothing is certain and terror waits with frozen breath threading through timber and flesh alike.